And the color settings in Photoshop determine the range of colors that are actually available for any photograph you're working on. Let's get started by choosing Edit, followed by Color Settings from the menu. That will bring up the Color Settings dialog. This dialog might look a little complicated, and it's actually going to look even more complicated in a few moments, but there's actually only a few things you need to concern yourself with here, and really one primary setting, and that's the working space for RGB images. When you're working on an RGB image, you have a choice of the range of colors that's available to you. The general options you'll want to choose among are sRGB, Adobe RGB, or ProPhoto RGB. And ProPhoto RGB has the largest color gamut of all of these color spaces. That means it has the largest range of possible colors that can be used within your image. In fact, such a huge range of colors that some of the colors defined by ProPhoto RGB aren't even real colors at all. They don't exist. They're completely imaginary. And of course, many monitors and printers are not able to reproduce the full range of colors, but ProPhoto RGB does give you the maximum flexibility, and so it's the color space that I recommend using when optimizing color in your photographs. It is important, however, to keep in mind that with ProPhoto RGB, because the range of colors is so absolutely huge, there is a high risk of posterization if you're working in the 8-bit per channel mode. So while I recommend ProPhoto RGB as your working space for RGB images, I also highly encourage you to always be working in the 16-bit per channel mode. For other situations and in certain workflows, it might be appropriate to use the sRGB color space. This can be thought of as a color space ideally suited for digital displays. And for other situations, Adobe RGB is also a good choice, especially if you'll be printing your images. But again, the widest range of colors is available with ProPhoto RGB, and so that's what I recommend here. In most cases, under color management policies, I'll set the option to convert to working RGB. That means that if you open an image that has a different color space than your working space, it will be converted to match that working space. In other words, in this case, if I were to open an image that is not in the ProPhoto RGB color space, it will be converted to ProPhoto RGB so that I can take full advantage of that color space. However, in some cases, such as when you open an 8-bit per channel image, you don't want to convert, and therefore, while I set the option here to convert, I also turn on all of the checkboxes down below so that I'll be prompted in this situation so that I can make a specific choice with the Convert to Working RGB option set as the default. You might notice that there is a More Options checkbox. This will bring up a series of additional options that are available to you in color settings, but I assure you, you really don't need to worry about these options. You can leave all of these at their defaults. There are certainly some workflows where these options might come into play, but generally speaking, I recommend leaving them at their default settings, and so in fact you can just leave the fewer options set here to simplify that dialog just a little bit. So again, the key setting here is that working space, setting it in this case to ProPhoto RGB. Most of the other settings here don't relate to RGB images, which means they don't relate to you for most of the work that you're likely to do. When you're finished establishing your color settings, you can simply click OK to apply those changes.